back to another edition of No Free Lunch, Economics for a Fallen World. I'm Jeff Guernsey, Professor Jeff Guernsey. I'm joined by Dr. Jeff Heyman. Dr. Heyman, today we want to talk about trade. So let's just lay out a hypothetical. Why should the U.S. trade with, let's say, Haiti?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I talk about this in the textbook in large part because when you look at the United States as a very large, robust economy compared to a more impoverished economy, you might not think that there's anything that there would be a benefit for us to trade with them. After all, we can surely do everything, just about everything better than Haiti. You can imagine maybe coffee or things like that. But that's actually not true. And in economics, what we've learned, and this is a fundamental truth that guides all of our economic ideas, we have two concepts that we have to kind of wrestle with. First is something called absolute advantage. And the absolute advantage might be like for myself, when I had young children, I would make them go out and pick up sticks. We'd have these pick-up stick parties, and I would join them, of course, but it would go much faster if I had at least a little bit of help from the kids. But they couldn't do any of the more adulting things like paying taxes and so forth. So I could pick up way more sticks than them. I could do all the taxes much faster than them. So we would say I have an absolute advantage in the production of both those services. But the reality is my time was more valuable because I could also do the taxes where they couldn't do taxes at all. And so that's just a personal example. You can imagine there's some things such that if I can trade some time with them, and we could bribe them appropriately with ice cream and other things to join us for these pickup stick parties, but they would do some of their labor, and then I would expend some of my labor. We'd get done faster because I'd have to stay with them the whole time. But the point would be that would free up some of my labor to pay taxes. What we would say is they actually have a comparative advantage in the production of stick pickups, and because they would have to give up far less in terms of income tax preparation, if you want to think about that, than I would, because they couldn't do it at all. So Haiti and the United States is kind of a similar advantage, similar example. So the U.S. in the textbook we use the example of steel and corn. And I do not know anything about the Haitian steel producing thing, but it's probably very small. I'm sure they have perhaps some. And likewise, they can undoubtedly grow corn. But we can undoubtedly do both of those things better. Right here in Ohio has an absolute advantage in the production of both those quantities than does Haiti. But the opportunity cost, what Haiti might have to give up, would be different than what we would have to give up. And what we find is that everybody has what we call a comparative advantage in something, such that their next best alternative, they have to give up less of that than what another country might. And so there's really opportunities from gains for trade. It gets a little bit more difficult, so I think it's probably useful. We did show a chart. If you'll bring the chart up, please. We've got a situation here where Sarah is a great lawyer. Sarah can charge $500 an hour for her legal services. But she also is a great typist. She can type 100 words per minute without any error. But she hires a secretary named Martha. Martha is just an average typist. She's only able to do 40 words per minute, but kind of like my kids with the income taxes, she can't do the lawyering skills at all. So she has there's no opportunity cost to type because she can't do the legal work. So you might look at it and say, well, hey, doesn't Sarah, because she can type so fast, why not just fire Martha? She can do twice as good. But now this is where our friend opportunity cost comes in, and it shows this idea of comparative advantage. So for Martha, she's going to cost to do the way we've structured this example, and you can see, let's say that there's 19,200 words over the 8 hours. Someone that's typing at 40 words per minute could do that in a day. That's just what a day worked out. Well, we would see that even though Martha, the secretary, it would take 8 hours to do that, and Sarah could do it in only 3.2 hours, think about the opportunity cost. What would 3.2 hours of legal services by Sarah have been valued at? And so we can crunch those numbers, and we actually see that kind of work would have been $1,600. And yet, if Secretary Martha was only making $10 an hour, it would have only cost $80 to have her do that work. So what we see is that even though Martha, the secretary, is a much worse typist than is Sarah, the owner of the business, her opportunity cost is far smaller to type. And so we should definitely hire Martha to type and have Sarah use all of her valuable time to do the lawyering skills. And if she were to fire Martha, as we do the numbers here, we find it would actually cost Martha $1,520 to fire her, which is the difference between what she could have made with that legal work versus the savings she would have gotten from hiring Martha as a secretary. So the numbers can be kind of tough to work through, but it's worth it. Do it just so you make sure you understand that this does work out. Here's the incredible thing that we ought to focus on, though. The encouraging thing for all of us, because all of us are good at some things and all of us are not so good at other things. God has so orchestrated that such that each group, no matter if we think Haiti, they can't possibly have something to offer for us. Oh no, they do. They have tremendous things to offer to us. And so every individual, every country has something to bring to the table because everybody has a lower opportunity cost in something. And what that does is it seems like God has so orchestrated the differences in aptitudes, ability, even natural resources across the globe that it encourages us to socially cooperate with others, people that we might not even like. And so that's the wonderful thing. I would assert that's a measure of God's common grace because everybody can have a comparative advantage even if you don't have an absolute advantage. And do you have any thoughts that you'd share?
Yeah, good point. So I'm thinking of your pick up sticks example. I mean, another example you could come up with is, let's consider a professional athlete and he's got two choices. He can make that TV commercial or he can cut the yard. Yeah. And he's probably better than his teenage child at both of them. Yeah. But I think we all would intuit that, he's probably going to go make the commercial, which will make him a bunch of money. And he's willing to pay his son or his daughter to cut the yard, or pay a third party if that's the case. So this, 2x2 matrix, it's an example of an economic model. You could do this with two countries. In fact, Ricardo's best known for that, right? Looking at two European countries, two goods, et cetera. Do you think it extends beyond just that simplistic economic model?
It absolutely does. I mean, wonderful thing about economics that we say about even your principles level microeconomics, which is basically what we're talking about here, is it's simple, but it's not simplistic. It really has broad explanatory power. Even I'm teaching in my intermediate micro course right now at a little bit more advanced level. This two good model can be very broad because you can have one of the goods be all other goods. We call that a composite good. And so it actually is much more robust than one might initially think. And so it's very useful to illustrate a lot of principles.
Maybe a conversation for another day, the impact of globalization, but let's talk about the impact of free trade.
Sure.
Some have said that free trade, using comparative advantage, et cetera, has been beneficial to a number of people on this planet Earth.
Well, we've seen that. I mean, the data of history are overwhelming that what you've seen in terms of the rapid productivity growth over really the last 3 centuries is due largely to globalization and free trade, largely free trade. There's always been some restrictions. So I think your point's well made because we have the division of labor, Adam Smith noted, was really that source of productivity growth across the emergence of the Industrial Revolution. But that would be limited by the extent of the market. The bigger the market you had to sell into, the more you could divide the steps of labor and the more productive you could become and produce. And so with free trade, you are able to extend beyond a city's borders, a state's borders, a country's borders, and every step you make the market broader, you're allowing the specialization to get deeper, and that makes for more total productivity for everybody. So for instance, a common example today would be, if you look at Taiwan, Taiwan has these massive semiconductor factories that are way, way bigger than obviously that they can make for their own consumption, but moreover, they're able to drive efficiencies very, very low for those things because they can sell to the whole world. And here's the other final marvelous thing on that. Since about 1990, we have seen 1 billion people fall out of extreme poverty across the globe, largely due to globalization and largely free trade. Now, most of that global poverty drop was in India and China, but you've seen that everywhere trade is applied, you've seen improvement in social welfare.
And it seems as Christians we ought to be concerned about that. Those
Yes.
people were made Imago Dei, so if they're better off materially, that's a common grace, like you said.
Amen.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us for this episode of No Free Lunch, Economics in a Fallen World. We'll see you next time.